Welcome to Israel Watch. Analysts and experts in the Hebrew media have been focusing on the ongoing threats against Iran and the potential risks of launching any such attacks. They are also examining Israel's objectives in Syria and the implications of Yemeni attacks on the Israeli entity, especially given the failure to intercept ballistic missiles launched from Yemen. Today, we will delve into these topics with our guest, Mr. Nabi Awazeh, who closely follows Israeli affairs. We're glad to have you with us, esteemed guest.
Thank you.
Repeated threats made by Israeli occupation leaders against Iran and the possibility of a military attack have drawn criticisms from a senior military officer in the occupation army, who cautioned against underestimating Iran's capabilities and the consequences of such an attack.
הפציעה האיראנית הזאת ולא לחוש פה, אתה יודע, לא לחגוג להם על אדם יותר מדי, אלא לנהוג בחוכמה. צריך לתת להם את הנתיב של איזשהו אולטימטום פוליטי. ואם הם מוכנים בטוב לפרק את הגרעין ולהפסיק את חימוש האזור, סבבה, לא חייבים לתקוף.
סבבה.
לא נמאס להם מהקונספציות האלה שלהם, לא נמאס להם מהשטויות האלה, באמת. פשמן, אתה מבין את האירוע או לא מבין את האירוע? שאני רוצה להבין.
אני מבין את האירוע. אם אתה חושב שהוא מדבר את דעתו האמיתית, אתה לא...
מה, צה"ל לא רוצה לתקוף באיראן? אני שומע את זה. שומע שצה"ל לא רוצה לתקוף באיראן.
אני מדבר על ישראל זיו. ברור שצה"ל לא רצה את הביפרים, צה"ל לא רצה את לבנון, צה"ל רצה לצאת מעזה כבר מזמן. בסדר, אז אין, זה מה שהם. זה לא סוסים דוהרים, נצטרך לדרבן אותם, אין מה לעשות. כל עוד הם מבינים שמי שמקבל את ההחלטה זה הדרג המדיני. כן, ואני אומר את זה גם לנתניהו. לבוא בדיעבד, אם הם יעשו מה שהם עשו אגב ב-2012, למי שלא זוכר, או משהו באזור, שמדינת ישראל תכננה לתקוף באיראן, וראש המוסד הלך לספר על זה ל-CIA כדי לטרפד את התקיפה. שאני לא אומר את זה כביקורת על ראש הממשלה, אני אומר לו להיזהר, כי כבר ראינו שזה קרה בעבר. זאת אומרת, אם הם עושים בעיות, תבוא בזמן אמת ותגיד, חברים, יש בעיה והדרג המדיני חייב להחליט.
Well, Mr. Awazeh, based on what we just saw, what is the background of these recurring threats from Israeli occupation leaders regarding an attack on Iran? It's clear that these threats have intensified in frequency and intensity following the events in Syria.
مساء الخير لك وللمشاهدين الكرام. واضح انه النقاش حول موضوع ايران يحتاج.
Greetings to you and the dear viewers. It's clear that the discussion surrounding Iran is a top priority for Israel on multiple levels. Politically, there are disagreements about the necessity of a military strike. On the military front, there is a deep conversation about how such a strike could potentially undermine previous achievements, what some consider successes, in Gaza and Lebanon, as well as the changes seen in Syria. There is serious debate about whether a significant military action against the Islamic Republic of Iran could provoke a substantial response from Iran. This concern is heightened by the situation in Yemen, where Israeli perspectives suggest that even a single missile launched from there can create significant anxiety within Israel, prompting millions to seek shelter early in the morning. When comparing this to the Iranian context, if Iran were to launch missile strikes using its extensive capabilities, which far exceed those of Yemen, it would undoubtedly create major issues within Israel and could jeopardize larger strategic goals.
We noticed that the commentator in the Hebrew media actually criticized the occupying army for wanting to attack Iran. What do you think this indicates?
This is part of the ongoing military political discussion, and existing military and political divisions are well known. Benjamin Netanyahu consistently seeks to place the blame for failures on the military, as he is currently the most prominent figure in Israeli domestic politics, particularly in terms of competition with his political stance. Therefore, Netanyahu aims to steer events towards delivering this strike. However, there is significant caution regarding the positions of the United States and the European community, as certain strategic approaches suggest that such strikes could completely destabilize the region and disrupt the political achievements that have been made.
Military experts and former officers from the Israeli army have issued warnings about the potential consequences of attacking Iran. What is the reality behind these claims?
به ما حقيقتها.
إسرائيل زيف معروف أنه دائما يعارض
Israel Zaif is well known for consistently opposing Benjamin Netanyahu's policies, particularly regarding military strikes or reliance on military solutions. The core of the internal debate in Israel revolves around the idea that Netanyahu seeks to prolong the war or declare a state of war to evade pressing domestic issues, especially as he now faces significant legal challenges in Israeli courts, leading to extensive discussions on this matter.
النقاشات الداخلية حول هذا الموضوع.
Let's shift our focus to the situation in Syria, particularly regarding the Israeli incursion into Syrian territory. As the areas occupied by the Israeli army continue to expand, a former Israeli minister has cautioned that we shouldn't underestimate the silence of the Syrians, as they may respond to this occupation in a significant way.
כן, התמימות חוזרת אל ביתנו. חושב שיש שם חובבי ישראל. בואו נקרא את המפה כמו שצריך. אני מבין שעשו שם הפיכה, אני מבין שאלוהים היה איתנו, אני מבין שהגענו לימות המשיח, שהשמדנו להם 80% מהצבא שלהם. דבר נפלא שלהם, אף אחד לא יכול אפילו לדמיין. אבל בואו לא נהיה תמימים. המושג הזה, שקט יענה בשקט, כבר עברנו אותו וסבלנו מהדבר הזה. אז לכן בואו נטפל בזה בחשדנות, בואו נימצא בשטח שלהם עד כמה שנצטרך, וברגע שנרצה ניסוג חזרה לגבול הישראלי. אבל אני לא תמים, הם בתהליך של זמן שיתחילו להתעצם, אולי גם יקבלו נשק חדש מהסובייטים. כן, ואז הם ירצו את סוריה הגדולה, וירצו גם להגיע לירדן. אל תתמימה, אל תתמימה.
What are the goals that Netanyahu and his military leaders aim to achieve by further penetrating into Syrian territory?
داخل الأراضي السورية.
يعني تحت نظرية إقامة مناطق عازلة وهو ما شاهدناه من خلال
The concept of establishing buffer zones, as seen in the southern Lebanon and Gaza, extends to the northern West Bank, where Netanyahu aims to expand territorial control. This involves both military and security measures, like those observed in Jabalia and northern Gaza, and settlement activities in the West Bank. The situation in Syria is particularly tied to future political and strategic demands, which are framed as necessary for protecting Israeli security. Israeli assessments of the evolving situation in Syria are not optimistic, especially with the belief that the Shiite jihadist axis has been replaced by a Sunni jihadist one. Both factions are perceived as groups that don't love the sons of Zion, highlighting the complex array of contradictions and rivalries within Syria today, including those that vehemently oppose the Israeli entity. So this is the real concern, and it's clear. This has led Israel to annul the separation of forces agreement and destroy Syrian military capabilities, reportedly destroying around 80% of the Syrian army's military assets. This action is driven not only by the fear of weaponry falling into the hands of the resistance groups in Lebanon or Gaza, but also by border security concerns.
وهل يمكن أن تصبح أو تقوى المجموعات الجهادية التي تكن العداء؟
In this context, the Israeli War Minister Katz stated that the terrorist organizations that were present in Idlib are now in Damascus. What does this statement imply?
أولاً هو يعني يقارب الموضوع من الجانب السياسي وليس من الجانب العسكري.
First, he approaches the topic from a political perspective rather than a military one, with Israeli military assessments indicating that the new situation in Syria is concerning due to the potential chaos within the country. This scenario is seen as one of the more favorable options for Tel Aviv, especially considering the internal conflicts among various Syrian factions. Additionally, part of the Israeli military evaluation suggests targeting the army to prevent any strong force from emerging in the event of future chaos, which the Israelis believe is likely and may even be something they seek to encourage to serve their own interests.
But what happened in Syria, while seems to be in favor of Israel, does not serve the Israeli entity to a great extent. Don't you think so?
يعني هناك زاويتين في هذا الأمر.
There are two angles to consider in this matter. One relates to the fact that Turkey has become directly involved on the northern borders of Tel Aviv or the Israeli entity. This has led to extensive discussions suggesting that the current governance in Syria is influenced by Turkey, effectively replacing Iran in the context of Israeli terminology. This topic has sparked debate, but it's important not to rely too heavily on Erdogan's strategy, as it is seen as fluctuating rather rather than consistent from an Israeli perspective. This uncertainty will also impact the internal political landscape in Israel. While there are numerous demands, they all fall under the framework that Trump envisions for the upcoming phase. This is the core of the discussion in Tel Aviv about the issue of avoiding the aftermath and from the end of 2025 in Syria, specifically in the Mount Hermon area.
2025 في سوريا وتحديدا في منطقة جبل الشيخ.
ولننتقل مشاهدينا إلى جبهة الإسناد اليمنية لغزة.
Let's turn our attention to the Yemenis pro-Gaza operations. Despite the recent Israeli aggression on Sana'a airport and the port of Hodeidah, Yemeni missile strikes continue to target deep into occupied territory. The Hebrew media and its analysts have dedicated significant coverage to discussions about Yemeni missile technology and the failure of air defense systems to intercept them.
טכניקה טרוריסטית נהדרת, שבה טיל אחד מצליח, אומרים לשתק מדינה שלמה, להעיר מדינה שלמה ברחבי הארץ. תראה, אנחנו מדברים בעצם על טיל אחד שגורם להזעקות כבר לא רק במרכז הארץ, אלא גם בדרום הר חברון, באשדוד, בכל שפלת יהודה, ובעצם מצליח ביעדו. הרי היעד שלהם הוא לא באמת להפיל את בסיס הקריה, אף אחד לא חושב, אני מאמין שגם הם לא חושבים שהם יצליחו בעזרת הטילים האלה באמת.
לא, הם רוצים לטרטר אותנו, ברור.
הם מחפשים את זה, וזו בדיוק הנודניקיות שבמהלך הזה, והשאלה במערכת הביטחון הישראלית. הרי אם היה פה איזשהו אתגר אסטרטגי אדיר, או איום ממשי על ביטחונם של כל אזרחי מדינת ישראל,
A huge terrorist technology, a major strategic challenge, a single Yemeni missile, a single missile that destroyed the Israeli entity and awakened the population in all its regions. Based on what we just saw, what do these remarks mean?
يعني واحدة من أهم منجزات هذا الصاروخ.
One of the significant achievements of this missile is that it successfully bypassed all of Israel's highly advanced air defense systems, including the Iron Dome and David's Sling. Furthermore, just a few days ago, the Israelis had to resort to using the American defense system stationed in the Negev. For the first time, a missile of this type managed to evade all these systems, hitting the designated targets. This situation poses a considerable challenge to the Israeli strategy and missile defense, highlighting a significant vulnerability in their airstrikes, especially since various advanced aircraft were deployed, including the F-35S, F-35A, and the latest version of the F-16. This is seen as a failure as it indicates that the conflict cannot be resolved through air superiority alone, emphasizing the limited capabilities of the Israeli Air Force in addressing distant targets, especially since Yemen responded directly on the same night.
Despite the recent aggression against Sana'a's airport and the targeting of civilian and economic sites in various regions of Yemen, the Yemenis continue to launch missiles. This raises questions, as we have seen, about the Israeli army's ability to confront the Yemenis and the prevailing atmosphere regarding the Israeli entity.
A new proposal has emerged regarding the need to utilize naval forces as the Air Force and air defense systems have failed or are unable to respond effectively. These elements are interconnected, leading to a call for a different approach to address these threats against Israel using the Navy weapons.
Does resorting to the sea mean that the air and administrative failure have escalated?
I believe it won't yield results because the context is quite different. The geographical situation in Yemen is very distant, making it impossible to conduct ground attacks or incursions like those seen in Gaza, Lebanon, or the West Bank. This ultimately brings us back to the model related to missile capabilities in naval forces.
Well, we have a clear example. The British and American destroyers couldn't stand against the Yemenis. So how is it that today they are resorting to the Israeli naval forces?
This reinforces the previous theory that the Operation Prosperity Guardian, launched by the U.S. Secretary of Defense in the middle of last year, was unsuccessful and yielded no results. All capabilities and resources were utilized from nearly 14 countries worldwide to address the Yemeni threats, but this policy has proven ineffective. As a result, it will not bring anything new to the naval forces of Western nations, particularly the United States. Additionally, U.S. fighter jets also were unable to stop Yemen from supporting Gaza, and this situation is likely to repeat itself, even with Tel Aviv.
وأستاذ الكريم ومشاهدينا نبقى في السياق.
Israeli analysts in the Hebrew media have been questioning the effectiveness of the assassination threats directed at Yemeni leaders made by ministers in Netanyahu's administration, including War Minister Israel Katz.
إسرائيل كاتس.
כן, אלה שנשארו בתימן, אלה שלא מפחדים מחיסולים, כמו שקץ איים עליהם, בעצם שומעים על חיוך, שומעים על אופטימיות, שומעים על אותו מרכיב של איומים על ישראל, וצריך להבין, הם אומרים גם, אותו דובר, שבעצם השהדה, כאילו המות הקדושים, הוא בעצם מצווה שלנו, קצת מזכיר את חסן נסראללה, אפרופו חיסולים במרחב האזורי, אבל בהחלט הם פועלים וממשיכים לתקוף, ומבחינתם התקיפות האלו תימשכנה. צריך להזכיר, ערב הסעודית הגדולה ניהלה מלחמה 7 שנים מול החות'ים, 7 שנים שבעצם החות'ים תקפו אותם. אני חושב שאצלנו אסור שזה יקרה, או יותר נכון אין כוונה שזה יקרה כל כך, יימשך כל כך הרבה זמן.
Katz is threatening assassinations in Yemen following the failure to counter Yemeni missile attacks. To what extent might the occupation resort to this tactic, which is certainly not new to them?
يعني أولاً هذا قرار اتخذ على مستوى.
This decision was made at the level of the Israeli Mossad following a meeting that was leaked by the newspaper Yediot Aharonoth involving David Barnea and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They concluded that it was necessary to carry out an assassination operation targeting top leaders similar to what occurred in Gaza and Lebanon. However, there is a significant challenge related to the intelligence available, as Yemen is considered a secondary front and not part of the primary focus. Consequently, there isn't enough intelligence on the situation, which means they have to rely on the information held by the United States. Yediot Aharonoth reported that a decision has been made to establish a comprehensive information system in preparation for the assassination operations, as there is no capability to decisively win this battle using air power or even a combination of naval and air forces.
من خلال استخدام البحرية الإسرائيلية أو المزاوجة بينهما.
The Israeli commentator asserted that the assassinations in Yemen would not be beneficial and warned against becoming further entangled in the Yemeni quagmire, similar to what Saudi Arabia has experienced in its war efforts. What does this statement indicate? Is there a reconsideration of the missteps in this context?
هذا يؤشر فقط لمسألة واحدة أنه هذا الاغتيال.
This highlights a single point. The assassination of top leaders does not yield the expected results, as evidenced by past events in Gaza. Specifically, the targeted killings of key resistance figures in Gaza over the last 20 years, not just recently, as well as the attacks on resistance leadership in Lebanon, including the martyrdom of Abbas al-Musavi and later Hassan Nasrallah, show that such actions do not significantly impact the resistance capabilities. While there may be temporary setbacks or failures, the resistance quickly rebounds. According to Israeli analyses, the new generation within the resistance movements in the West Asia is shaped by the concept of martyrdom. Therefore, many Israeli analysts believe that these operations are ineffective in the long run and conversely tend to give rise to even more, as they put it, extremist leadership than before.
The statement made by Israeli War Minister Katz is seen as an acknowledgement of failure to counter the Yemeni missile attacks, especially when he suggests a change in approach.
It is indeed a sign of failure, as you mentioned, but it also indicates they are striving to make at least some achievements or accomplishments. However, within the Israeli internal situation, they view such threatening statements as unrelated to the political level. Specifically, the decision for an assassination does not come from the Israeli Minister of War, but rather from a level associated with the Mossad and Benjamin Netanyahu. This is why, in the case of Beirut Pagers operation, they did not mention Yoav Gallant throughout the entire process. This achievement, if we can call it that, is attributed to the Mossad operative, which is seen as a way to leverage this event for internal Israeli gains, especially given the extensive internal discussions regarding the future of political and military leadership in Israel.
من النقاش الداخلي الإسرائيلي له علاقة بمستقبل القيادات السياسية والعسكرية في إسرائيل.
Let's move on, dear viewers, to discuss the repercussions of the Yemeni front's attacks on the Israeli entity. The failure to achieve the declared objectives in the war on Gaza, along with the conflict in Lebanon, has led former Israeli War Minister Avigdor Lieberman to deliver sharp criticisms of Netanyahu, challenging the often repeated slogan of absolute victory.
גם ברצועת עזה, גם בחזית מול החות'ים, גם כל הזמן מתח שם בצפון. על איזה ניצחון מוחלט? מאיפה כל הדברי רעב האלו? מי צריך כל ה-60 minutes לחשוף שם את כל הסיפורים?
ליברמן מדבר כל הזמן על ניצחון וצריך לנצח ולעשות את מה שלא עושים טוב. איזה שר בעולם שרוצה לנצח ככה הוא מדבר לעם שלו? אנחנו חלשים, זה לא עובד טוב, וזה רע וזה רע. איזה ניצחון? ככה אתה מבין ניצחון? ככה אתה רוצה להנהיג? אתה טוען שאתה רוצה להיות הבא. מה זה הדבר הזה? שר במדינת ישראל עומד על הבמה.
לא שר.
סליחה, חבר כנסת במדינת ישראל, עומד על במה, טוען לכתר כזה ואחר, ומסתכל לעם שלו ולציבור שלו.
רוצה להיות ראש ממשלה.
כן, רוצה להיות ראש ממשלה, ואומר, אנחנו חלשים פה, ולא הצלחנו פה, שהמציאות הפוכה לחלוטין. ואבא שהיה פה אמר את זה בדיוק הפוך לחלוטין.
כן, אתה רואה את האבא לפני דקה.
אז זה היה, ככה, זה לא נציג ציבור.
Lieberman cannot tolerate the absolute victory lie that Netanyahu constantly repeats, especially in light of the failures in Yemen, Gaza, and Lebanon. How do you interpret that?
يعني أولاً هذا يؤكد بأنه كل الاستراتيجية اللي اتبعها بنيامين نتنياهو.
First, this highlights that every strategy employed by Benjamin Netanyahu, particularly regarding wars, ultimately leads to internal debates of disagreements within Israel. This is especially true for influential figures like Avigdor Lieberman, who represents a significant segment of Israeli society. Consequently, the internal reshuffling within Israel complicates the larger strategic objectives, particularly with elections potentially looming in 2026. There is an ongoing internal debate in Israel about where these so-called major achievements are being directed, especially as the focus narrows on political balances within the country. Netanyahu, known for attracting controversies and conflicts, faces numerous challenges, particularly within the legal proceedings against him. Currently, he's being questioned by his lawyer, and tomorrow the prosecution will take their turn. The key difference here is that while the lawyer is directing certain very uncomfortable questions to the attorneys regarding the judiciary and corruption files, the bigger question arises when the public prosecution starts asking questions based on the indictment against him in the third corruption case. As we approach this phase, which is expected to extend into the middle of the next year, the internal debate in Israel intensifies and criticisms begin to emerge related to significant failures.
وبدأت المواقف تطال من بوابة
Israeli affairs expert Mr. Nabi Awaza, thank you so much for joining us in this episode of Israel Watch. Dear viewers, until we meet again, take care.